Are there two Chinas? Well, there's two governments, both with China in their names. There's this one, the People's Republic of China, which sits here. Then there's the Republic of China, also known as Taiwan, over here. These small islands that make up Taiwan are home to 23 million people.
I have to correct you, Ali. I have to correct you.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
only one China,
Okay.
and the only legal representative of China is the Beijing government. That's the official line
Yeah.
of the United States government.
Yeah.
You can check that on the U.S. State Department webpage. That's what it says. This is known as the One China principle.
Uh-huh.
That was the foundation of the U.S. American relationship ever since the Nixon visit. So
Yeah,
this is
let's
also the official policy
yeah.
of the Beijing government.
Yeah,
There's only
yeah.
one
Yeah,
China.
yeah. Okay.
There's only one China,
Yeah.
and Taiwan is part of China.
Yeah, okay. So let's take it from here actually.
Taiwan is island. Is the name of the island.
Yeah.
But there is a regime on Taiwan that calls itself the Republic of China. And
Yeah.
this and they celebrate their national day on October 10th. And the October 10th is the anniversary date of the 1911 Chinese Revolution that overthrew the thousand-year-old monarchy of Qin Dynasty. So this is a long history, but where do you want me to begin? Because
Um,
we can
uh,
talk for hours
where
about
did
this.
this regime come from? Let's like reverse
Well,
engineer
okay. First of
this.
all, like a brief history of Taiwan, the island itself. The island has been populated by people since Neolithic age, at least. We know that from archaeology, and the imperial government that was based in China by the time of Yuan dynasty, so around the time of Kublai Khan, they set up administration on Penhu Island, which is the group of islands that's the closest to the Taiwan island. This happened right after the failed Mongol invasion of Japan. After Yuan dynasty tried to invade Japan twice, it failed, and Kublai Khan was planning a third invasion of Japan. And this time, they instead of traveling from Korea across the Strait of Tsushima to Japan, they decided to try a third route. They tried to go from south, from Taiwan and up. So that's when Yuan Dynasty they set up a naval base on the island of Penghu, which is really close to the main Taiwan island itself. And that but the invasion never happened. The third invasion of Japan never happened. So but the imperial government on China maintained control on Penghu Island. The Taiwan island, the main island of Taiwan at this time was populated mostly by indigenous people. Um, and toward the Ming Dynasty, toward the end of the Ming Dynasty, there's already a lot of Chinese traders, merchants from traveling from mainland through Penghu Island to trade with the natives on Taiwan. And because Taiwan at that time has abundance of deer. So the deer skin is one of the main commodities that Taiwan exported. And then a lot of Chinese pirates also start to move into the island to get away from the imperial authority. Um, and so many pirates set up their base of operation on Taiwan Island, so to be outside of the control of the imperial authority in Beijing. And then around at the toward the end of the Ming Dynasty, one of the famous former Chinese pirate, he's quote unquote defected to the imperial government, and he was made a important official, and because the Ming government wanted to just decide to pay off the pirates and to be part of their navy. And then he was tasked with expelling the European powers who were encroaching on the Chinese coast at this time. This time was Portuguese and Dutch. So the Ming Dynasty managed to fight off the Portuguese and then Dutch. But this pirate, Zheng Zilong, he offered the Dutch a deal. He said, "Look, like there's no way we're gonna allow you to come to set up shop on mainland China, but there's this island of Taiwan you can go." And so Dutch started their colony on Taiwan in the early 1600s, and then toward the end to the mid 1600s, the Dutch had their colony on Taiwan running for almost 40 years, from around 1620s to 1661. and and then the Spanish also came. The Spanish also set up a colony in northern Taiwan, but the Dutch kicked them out. And then Dutch started to import a lot of Chinese labor from mainland to the Taiwan island because according to the Dutch governor, colonial governor at the time, he said, "Well, Taiwan is a land of milk and honey, and Chinese are the worker bees." So they started to import a lot of Chinese indentured servants to Taiwan to work the sugar plantations. They Dutch was trying to run a plantation-based economy on Taiwan, and the Chinese were brought in to work on the sugarcane plantations, and then there's a lot of dissatisfaction among the Chinese about the Dutch rule, because the Dutch were famously corrupt. I mean, they always try to extract the maximum amount of bribes, even among the Chinese working population they imported over. And then the head of the pirate Zheng Zilong, he defected to the Qin dynasty, the coming new imperial dynasty, but in the process, his home base was sacked by the Qin army, and his many member of his family were killed, including his Japanese wife. So that made his son very angry. His son, famously known as Koshinga, and he decided to be a mean loyalist to resist the, the the incoming Qin dynasty, and he made the southern China a base for his operation. But he was facing increasing pressure by the Manchu government, so he decided to look for alternative base, and then he looked toward the Dutch colony of Taiwan, and he sent a letter to the Dutch colonial governor and said, "Look, this is our land. This is the land of the Ming, and my dad allowed you to settle here, but it was only a temporary measure. Now we want it back." And of course, Dutch did not agree. So Koxinga led his fleet of 20,000 sailors cross the Taiwan Strait and started to besieging the Dutch fortress of New Zealandia. The siege took more than a year. So finally, in 1661, the Dutch surrendered, and Koxinga's forces controlled Taiwan, and he turned that as like the last stronghold of the Ming Dynasty until 1680s, when the Qin Dynasty finally subjugated Taiwan, and so incorporated Taiwan as part of the Qing imperial domain. And Taiwan was placed as a prefecture under the Fujian province across the Taiwan Strait. Fast forward hundreds of years, the more European powers came, that led to the Sino-French War. And during the Sino-French War, what Vietnam was fighting China both over possession of Vietnam, because Vietnam at that time was a tributary state of China, and the Emperor of Vietnam asked China for help to fight the French. And so the war took place both in Vietnam and in the waters in South China Sea and East China Sea. And the French, they decide to park their fleet in the Taiwan Strait to cut off the supply lines between the island of Taiwan and mainland China. And they French even uh, attempted a landing on Taiwan itself, but they were beaten back. But after this episode, the Qing government realized the importance of Taiwan. So after 1884, the Qing government formally separated Taiwan from the Fujian province and made Taiwan a province of its own, the Taiwan province. So a lot of people who talk about Taiwan, they say, "Oh, Taiwan only became China in 1884." That's not true. Taiwan just was only made a province in 1884. Before it was already part of China. It was already part of the Qin dynasty since 1680. I think 1682. The exact date I have to check, but it was took back from Koxinga took Taiwan back from Dutch back in 1661. So all this time, for the purpose of people who living on Taiwan, Taiwan was part of China, and that would change after the first Sino-Japanese War in 1894, 1895. China was defeated, and China had to cede the island of Taiwan to the Empire of Japan. So then, for the next 50 years, from 1895 to 1945, Taiwan became a Japanese colony. Okay, so 1945, Empire of Japan got defeated. Japan had to give up all its former imperial colonial possessions, including Taiwan. So in 1945, Taiwan reverted back to the Chinese rule, and uh, the official Chinese government at the time, under Chiang Kai-shek, sent the army to Taiwan to accept the Japanese surrender of the island, and then the Chinese Civil War happened on mainland China. The communist forces won, the nationalist government under Chiang Kai-shek, they were defeated, so they withdrew to Taiwan as their last stronghold. Now this is brings us back to 1949, 1950. Now for Mao, he's wanted to cross over the Taiwan Strait to liberate Taiwan as well. But then in 1950, June 1950, Korean War happened. And when Korean War happened, President Truman made the decision that would have a lasting impact until today. He sent the U.S. Seventh Fleet into the Taiwan Strait to prevent the Chinese Communist forces from crossing over to Taiwan. At that time, mainland China does not have a navy, so there's nothing they could do when the U.S. aircraft carrier battle group steamed into the Taiwan Strait. And so, as a result of that, in fact, the Mao at that time, China had about 500,000 troops ready to cross Taiwan Strait for that for the landing effort. So Mao took those 500,000 troops north to Manchuria and sent them into Korea in the during the Korean War. So the sequence of event is U.S. sent the Seventh Fleet into Taiwan Strait first. This happened in July 1950, and Mao took the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, that was poised to go to Taiwan north to send them into Korea in October 1950, and that was a Chinese intervention in the Korean War. But as a result of this, the the Chiang Kai-shek's government was saved by American military forces. Basically, they were able to. So the separation between island of Taiwan and mainland China persisted until this day. This is why there's a political separation um, since 1949, and then the Chiang Kai-shek, but for for a period from 1945 till 1987, Taiwan was placed under so-called martial law. It was function. It was basically a Taiwan was governed under a military dictatorship of Chiang Kai-shek and his family, later his sons, and the martial law wasn't lifted until 1987. So there was No, no usually U.S. during the Cold War they try to pose Taiwan as a free China, right? But it's not free. It's literally a military dictatorship, just like South Korea was at the same time during the Cold War. And then in the aftermath of the end of the Cold War, the leadership in Taiwan realized that they will have to liberalize. They will have to liberalize if they want to count on American support because their value as American allies in the region start to diminishing as the Cold War was drawing a close. So they this is an effort when they Taiwan started to have finally have the island-wide election in the 1990s. And and there's a government transition. So previously, Chiang Kai-shek's party, the Chinese Nationalist Party, or AKA KMT, they have dominated the island politics ever since they came over from mainland China. But since the 1980s, there was a growing opposition on the Taiwan island itself to the military dictatorship rule. And these were known as these are the liberal opposition. Um, I call them liberal opposition because the leftist opposition, the communists, they have all got purged during the what's known as White Terror that lasted from 1945 to 1987. All the leftists and communists, they all got killed off. So what's left, the opposition that was left to oppose Chiang Kai-shek's KMT party rule was this liberal opposition, and their party platform is Taiwan independence. Because when Chiang Kai-shek relocated to Taiwan, his party, literally called Chinese Nationalist Party, um, and Chiang Kai-shek himself is very much a Chinese nationalist. So the Taiwan separatism movement grew out of opposition to the KMT rule. They say, okay, well, Taiwan, if Taiwan is independent, not part of China, then you have no legitimacy to continue to rule us. And they they formed what's known as DPP party, the Democratic Progressive Party, and they start to winning elections on grassroots levels and eventually on national on island wide level in Taiwan. So Taiwan for a while had a two-party system. They had the KMT, which originally came with Chiang Kai-shek to the island since 1949, and then they have the DPP, who grew out of this 1980s liberal opposition to KMT rule. So DPP, their party platform is built on Taiwan independence, but even after the DPP won several presidential elections, they never really carried out their their promise, what's written in their party platform, because they understand if they do that, that will be the trigger for war. Because for China, the red line is a de jure declaration of Taiwan independence. Um, that would definitely trigger a military intervention. So instead, the excuse they use is, okay, we don't have to declare independence because Taiwan is already independent. It's called the Republic of China. So we don't have to declare independence, since Republic of China has been in existence since 1911, Chinese Revolution. So this is a situation right now. The DPP is a ruling party currently. KMT now is in opposition, and more recently there was a third party, the Taiwan People's Party (TPP), that kind of grew out as an opposition to DPP, and but also marks themselves different from the old KMT party. So during the last presidential election in Taiwan, the winning candidate from DPP actually only won 40% of the vote. But his opposition divided the votes because there were two opposition parties. Even though 60% voted not for DPP, but because the vote were divided up between the two opposition candidates, so the DPP still won. They won the plurality vote of 40% of the vote. So and then, but right now, U.S. has traditionally supported a separate status for Taiwan. During the Cold War, Taiwan was a front line. United States have stationed nuclear weapons on Taiwan, nuclear tipped missiles on Taiwan pointing
Okay,
at
okay.
mainland China, and they had planned to use it in 1958 during the Second Taiwan Strait crisis. We know that from the Daniel Ellsberg's leak several years back before Daniel Ellsberg passed away, and and but as a result of the 1972 Nixon visit to China, this is when Nixon signed the Shanghai Communique with the Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai, which stated U.S. will abide by the One China principle. United States recognize the China One China principle, which means there's only one China, and Taiwan is part of China, and the only legal representative of China is the government in Beijing. So that formed the basis of the U.S.-China relationship going on forward. And that led to the final normalization of ties in 1979 under Jimmy Carter's administration. So during the Cold War, U.S. says the real government of China, all of China, is the Republic of China government on Taiwan under Chiang Kai-shek. In fact, the Taiwan government, they occupied the seat of China on United Nations until 1970s, until early 1970s. It's only in the 1970s there was finally a UN vote that to vote to throw out Chiang Kai-shek's government from China's seat in UN and give it to the People's Republic of China. And then very soon after that, there was Nixon visit to China as well. So most of the countries in the world have switched recognition from Taipei to Beijing. Because it's kind of hard to pretend that the government on Taiwan is a representative of like hundreds of millions of people living on mainland China at that point. And and then but the media is a different story. I mean, because the media, so the media have switched from saying Taiwan is a free China, is a real China, to okay, Taiwan is a separate entity from China. This also paralleled political development on Taiwan itself. In around 2000, when DPP party won Taiwan presidential election, they started what's called de-Sinification campaign. So first is they remove from their educational curriculum everything that has to do with China. Before, Taiwanese kids, when they go to school, they learn about Chinese history, they learn about Chinese geography, they learn that they are Chinese. But now all the education program got revamped. So they they only learn about Taiwan, to the exclusion of rest of China. And what they were doing is, so-called nation building, right? They're trying to build a separate Taiwanese national identity. They're trying to build a Taiwanese nationalism. Um, I mean, to some extent, they were successful because even back in 1990s, if you ask people on Taiwan, do you identify as Chinese? Most people will say, of course, they identify both as Taiwanese and Chinese. They don't see a contradiction, right? To say, so, it's like people on mainland China say, I'm from Shanghai and I'm Chinese. It's like there's no
It's the same thing,
contradiction.
yeah.
But as result of the designification campaign, there has been a shift in the public sentiment in Taiwan, particularly among the younger generations, and 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 this is on top. And you also have to think about there has been a literal separation. There were no cross-strait communication for almost 50 years. Like the Taiwanese government only relaxed cross-strait travel in the late 1980s, and when they finally allowed some of these because when the KMT army traveled from mainland to Taiwan, they took millions of men of army personnel with them, and a lot of them were press gang into the army just just before the communist victory, and they were forced to leave their home on mainland China to come to Taiwan, and they were cut off from their families for 40 years. And then finally, in late 1980s, the Taiwan government said, okay, now we will make an exception for you so you can go back to mainland China to visit your relatives. So only starting from 1980s, there was finally some cross-strait travel and but for a lot of the youngins who grew up in Taiwan who had never been to mainland China, only thing they know about China is what their media tells them, and what Western media tells them, which is China is a evil bad place. It's a scary commie place, right? So I mean, the propaganda work. If you repeat a lie 1,000 times, it start to have an effect. And this is so in in the Western media, the media that you will be exposed to, the English language media, they often try to pose Taiwan as a separate entity that's separate from China. It's a evil, bad China that's trying to swallow up this plucky, democratic Taiwan. That is a dominating media narrative, and that's what many people in the Anglophone world buys into. But ignoring this very complicated some tech complicated background history, right? Most of the people they don't go learn about Taiwan history. They just glean their information from what their media feed them.
Wow. Okay, so you mentioned America jumping in the mid 1900s. You didn't mention why. What they would play a card on this. I mean, was there? Why did America jump into this area during the 1900 mid 1900s?
Oh, okay. You're talking about So what happened was during so Republic of China under Chiang Kai-shek was a U.S. ally during World War II, right, against Japan, and Chiang Kai-shek in many ways was seen as U.S. man in China. It's like he may be a bastard, but he's our bastard, right? And so United States supported Chiang Kai-shek all throughout the Chinese Civil War by giving him weapons. And a lot of the U.S. weapons that was promised to China during World War II never got delivered during the war because it was difficult to supply China. The only supply line was flying through the Himalayan hump. From the air bases in British India to fly into southwestern China. So a lot of the military supplies that was supposed to be sent over to China never arrived during the war. So a lot of these military hardware finally arrived when the war is over, just in time for the Chinese Civil War, and U.S. supplied Chiang Kai-shek with loans, with weapons, to allow him to fight the communists. So U.S. has always been involved from the very beginning. Since since the Chinese Civil War, and when the communists won, there was a famous debate in the U.S. Congress: who lost China? Right? They start blaming each other for losing China, as if China is a property of the United States. I mean, there was all the rage in the 1950s, the whole debate about who lost China. In fact, the whole "Who Lost China" campaign later got turned into the MacArthur's anti-communist campaign in United States. MacArthurism in United States grew out of this "Who Lost China" debate, because then they say, oh, this is because all these commie spies and moles in our State Department, right? And that led to the Red Scare and witch hunt inside the U.S. government itself. And that so United States have been involved from the very beginning. U.S. has always been hostile to the establishment of People's Republic of China from day one, even before day one, even before that. But in 1972, the difference was U.S. decided to exploit the Sino-Soviet split, right? Because they saw there was China and Soviet Union start to fight a border skirmish in 1969. So Kissinger thought to exploit the Sino-Soviet split by playing the China card, by drawing China into the anti-Soviet camp. And so arrangement was U.S. also have to give up certain things, which they withdrew their military from Taiwan. U.S. had armies, Marines, Navy personnel, Air Force, all stationed in Taiwan before, including nuclear tipped missiles, like I mentioned before. And so all that was withdrawn after Nixon visit to China. And the U.S. also cut off support to Tibetan rebels. It was based in Nepal and India. And before, CIA had been supporting Tibetan rebels carrying out the guerrilla campaign against uh, against China since 1950s. In 1970s, that's when they finally cut off funding because at that time my mom was actually working in a Tibetan area of China as a nurse. She saw in early 70s when the the rebels finally coming down to the mountain to reconciliate with the central government, and I think that coincided with the aftermath of the Nixon visit. And so U.S. has always been involved in this, and because U.S. itself had a lot of commercial interests in China even before World War II. This dates back to our talks about U.S.-China trade. U.S. had a lot of commercial interests in China, and Chiang Kai-shek was, in many ways, he was seen. There was the owner of Times Magazine. What's his name? Oh, God, I can't. I'm drawing a blank.
Mm.
But he was like the kind of the founder of the China lobby. He's another thing about U.S. foreign policy in the early 20th century. It's also driven by kind of the missionary zeal, try to convert people to Christianity. And and Chiang Kai-shek, he married a Christian wife, and so he also converted. So this is how the Americans saw Chiang Kai-shek as their man in China to Christianize China, to make everyone in Americans' image. So this is a reason for a lot of the support America was throwing behind Chiang Kai-shek. They also had a plan to turn Chiang Kai-shek's China as a sort of junior partner to United States in East Asia to counter the Soviet Union after the war. Sort of like the role that Japan ended up playing for United States. But that didn't plan out because the communists won the Chinese Civil War. Yeah, so the American hostility toward China dated to as early as the communist victory, and only was that was only scaled back after the Nixon visit, right? So right now, what we're witnessing right now is the U.S. government, particularly after since the Trump first term, is they're dialing back the clock. They're trying to they're trying to bring back the Cold War, at least between China and United States, and they're trying to again weaponizing the Taiwan issue, and they already sent 500 U.S. Marines to Taiwan. They also sent the um, Army Special Forces Green Berets to the islands off like couple miles offshore from China as well. So all this is to dial back the clock to bring the Cold War back. Um, but this is where we are.
Adding up soldiers onto Taiwan, this is aggression. How would the Chinese government would be reacting to this? Firstly, and
Well, I mean,
what does the
China has
future
been
look
very
like?
careful not to. Well, I mean, Chinese government have been very careful not to be baited into a conflict. This is what United States is trying to do, trying to stir up tensions. And so far, China has handled this very rationally because China also understand those, 500 Marines, whatever. It's they by themselves would not be able to tip the balance of power in the region. Their purpose is to serve as the so-called tripwire. You know, uh, This is a concept the U.S. developed when they put the U.S. troops on the ground in Korea. The tens of thousands of U.S. servicemen in Korea by themselves were not supposed to stop a a North Korean takeover, but their purpose to serve as a tripwire. Like if the war do break out, and if the American servicemen were put in dangerous way, now they can say, we gotta save Private Ryan. We have to go there and save our troops from danger. Right? They're put there as an excuse so U.S. can come in a much larger way, and China understand that. They're approaching this very cautiously, and they're not going to be baited into a war that China is not ready for, because right now China is still building its own strength, and China in 2030 will be much more powerful than China in 2025. So China can afford to wait. They already waited more than 80 years to resolve the Taiwan issue. They can afford to wait another 10, 20 years. It's United States right now saying, "Oh, the war is imminent." It's an English language media that's telling you, "Oh, this is very dangerous situation. China is gonna make a move anytime now." Back in 2023, U.S. a, U, a U.S. retired U.S. general said, "Oh, China is going to make a move on Taiwan in 2 years." Well, that would be this year. That would be 2025. That hasn't happened yet. So later they revised the date to 2027. But I'm telling you, if this conflict is going to come, it's not going to be initiated by China. All right, and China is very clear on what its red line is. If Taiwan declare independence, yes, there will be definitely be intervention. So U.S. on its side has been telling its puppets in Taipei also, like, don't go crazy. You can provoke China all you want, but make sure you don't go there and declare independence without telling us, because we're gonna be the ones that that you're gonna have to count on to save your butt, because most of the even the most hardcore separatists on Taiwan, their goal has always been putting their hope on Americans to do the fighting and dying for them. Whereas right now the Trump administration is berating Taiwanese leaderships, like, why aren't you doing more to arm yourself and to get militarily prepared for China? But that wasn't their goal in the first place. Their goal is to get Americans to bleed and die. And so this is a fundamental conflict. Americans want Taiwan to serve the role of Ukraine, right? To grind down mainland China, to make Chinese bleed. But Taiwan, even the hardcore separatists on Taiwan don't see that as their role. They see that U.S. should be doing that job, do the job of dying and bleeding, and so I don't see any. I don't think the conflict over Taiwan is gonna break out into a hot kinetic war anytime soon. This is my judgment. It will definitely not happen by 2027. After that, who knows? But I mean, from the Chinese perspective, China can afford to be patient and to wait out United States. U.S. is doing a fine job sabotaging itself. Don't interrupt your enemy when they're shooting them in the foot. Like the Trump is doing.